Hello and welcome back to the SDBO YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the ideal practice, which is just a term that I have coined to kind of define what is the right practice for you. There's no actual ideal practice except for what you have defined for yourself based off of your specific life circumstances. Before we dive into it, as always, I am not a professional and SDBO is not a professional organization, so we always encourage that you go out and seek professional advice from others. The ideal practice is defined by these 6 different areas of focus, and it helps us to really know exactly what our practice is going to look like the more we define these 6 things. Minimum practice revenue, hours of operation, the size of the practice, the insurance model, location, and the dentistry that we provide. So the minimum practice revenue, as it says, it's the smallest amount of money that the practice allows you to take home, and you need to make sure that that is equal to your living expenses. So first things first, figure out what your living expenses are. Figure out what you spend your money on and how much you spend every month. It's not as simple as it sounds, but once you get that figured out, then you're going to know exactly what you live life like and how much it costs to sustain your lifestyle. You don't want to assume that you're going to be more frugal in the future than you currently are. It's actually easier for us to increase our spending habits than to decrease them. It shows by the study that was performed by the people who have won the lottery. They actually have a 275% increased rate of bankruptcy. And that's because we're pretty bad at assuming exactly how much it costs to live. And so when we get into extra money, we just assume, oh, well, we can start spending more money. But in reality, if we don't run a check on that, then we end up spending more than we have. And so we need to make sure that when we're looking into our practice, that the cash flow of that practice matches the living expenses of our lifestyle. The cash flow can be calculated in a lot of different ways that we will dive into in different episodes. But here we just want to talk about that cash flow, it needs to be equal to or greater than the living expenses that you currently have. And you shouldn't just assume that the cash flow that practice has will automatically double or triple when you get in there. In fact, it usually takes a little bit of a nosedive for the first few months while you're getting your feet wet in practice ownership. Then once you get steady and stable, then it starts to go back up. But you need to know the trends so that you don't assume that you're just going to automatically double the size of a practice. Now, a good rule of thumb, this is kind of a rough estimate to get your starting point, is to assume that about 1/5 of the collections of that practice is equal to the amount of pay that you take home or the cash flow that you take home. And then you just look at the sustainability. Is the cash flow equal to your expenses? Is it greater? Because if it's equal to or greater than, then you can continue to assess it. But if it's lower than your monthly expenses, you must pass up on that practice. It won't be sustainable. So the hours of operation, very tightly connected to the amount of practice revenue that you make. So in a single doc practice, the amount of time that you spend in the practice is directly correlated to the amount of money that practice will make. Now, that starts to change as you get associates or partners, but we're just going to run with the assumption right now that all of us are getting into single doc ownership. When you look at our lifestyle and our work-life balance, we need to understand that the more time that we're away from the practice, the less that practice will make. Okay? So with that in mind, you should define these 2 things. What is your desired amount of time that you spend in the office per week? And what is the desired take-home pay? These 2 things are intricately related. And once you define exactly how much you want to take home, then you can calculate exactly how much the collections will need to be. So the desired take-home pay is not going to be that minimum take-home pay that we just barely talked about. It's going to be what you're in your idealistic, perfect practice, how much is it going to make, right? Your take-home pay times 5 is the collections, roughly, of that practice. Now you're going to divide that by your idealized hours of operation, right? So define how many days per week you want to work, how many weeks per year, and then what you're going to be doing is dividing the collections by the amount of weeks that you work or by the amount of days that you work, and it will give you a breakdown of how much the practice needs to make per day, per week, per hour even, if you start to do that. You can even divide it down to the chair, right? So you take your production per that day or that hour and divide it by the number of chairs that you have, and that'll give you your chair hour or your chair week and how much production you should be making during that time. Now compare that to the same calculations done for the practice as it currently is. That will show you exactly how much growth you need to have. You'll take your collections that you're desiring to take home, your desired collections divided by the current collections of that practice, and that will show you percentage-wise what is the requirement of growth that is needed. Anything that's greater than 30%, that will require you to adjust your chair hours. That will require you to do some outside work, maybe hire on associates. It's pretty difficult to grow past 30%. So once you start getting into a greater than a 30% growth rate, you should start thinking, how sustainable is this for the hours of operation that I want to have, the work-life balance that I want to have? Now that's directly correlated to the size of the practice. As a practice becomes bigger, it requires less hours of operation to hit the same amount of revenue. So let's say that you're working with 3 chairs versus working with 10 chairs. You already can tell that the practice that has 10 chairs can see more patients in a given hour. And so the larger your practice is, the quicker you're going to hit that goal. But you don't want to waste space. You don't want to be having empty chairs that you can't fill because you don't have that capacity. So you need to find the right balance of size to operatories and patient pool. Now, most people tend to underassume exactly how much space they need. Don't be afraid to think big. It's not that you should just jump into tripling the practice size that you originally had in mind, but don't limit yourself to the smaller number, right? It's a lot easier to have a chair that you pay for that you're working to fill than having to hit capacity in a smaller group and then having to completely renovate and completely redo all of your practice so that you have capacity to add more chairs. A complete renovation costs a lot more, and it's a lot more time consuming than having a chair that you're working to fill. So make sure you keep in mind your future growth goals, your future partnership and associate goals. These will determine exactly how big your operatory sizes should be. The insurance model is an interesting one. So you don't have any specific definition of you are an FFS, you are a PPO. You just have generally who do you see and why do you see them. You get to personally define that. So let's talk about the FFS, the PPO, the public. What are these? They're just kind of big general domains of different types of ways that you get paid for your services. FFS, that's a fee for service. Most people understand that as patient comes in, pays for the care they get, and then they receive that care. The PPO is the general or classic insurance that you would think of. If a patient says, I have insurance, most of the time they're talking about PPO. And then the public model is a government-provided type of service or insurance. That might be through the military, that could be Medicare, Medicaid, just kind of depends on the public service that they're providing. So the FFS, most people think of that and think, oh man, I want to run a practice like that. But you need to make sure it fits the type of practice that you're wanting to have. People don't understand that fee-for-service tends to be the least stable out of all of these insurance models. And that's because those people tend to be wealthier and therefore have the capability of saying, oh, well, I'm just going to go somewhere else. I'm just going to pick a different dentist. And if they don't like the ambiance, or maybe they didn't like the front desk or something like that, something unrelated to dentistry itself, that can cause you to lose clients. And so you really have to consider, the stability of your patient pool when you're providing the type of dentistry that you are. PPO tends to be a lot more stable because people will go to where their insurances are covered. The difficulty here is that you don't necessarily define exactly how much you will get reimbursed or compensated for your work. Now, you can have your fees, you can say a crown costs X amount, but if you're in network with a provider, that insurance company is going to say, no, we're actually only going to pay a different amount. And so there's a lot of frustration that people have with insurances because they tend to undercut the amount of reimbursement that you should receive. But you do get the sustainability and stability of a patient pool that has that insurance. Public tends to get a bad rap. A lot of people harp on the public insurance models like the VA or Medicare or Medicaid. Now, while there are some very legitimate difficulties with the system, it's not true that you cannot be successful. In fact, there's plenty of very, very, very successful dentists out there that run purely public models. Now, you do have to have training on exactly how you provide services and what services you provide, but you can have a very successful and sustainable business that is a public health service that is going to run through government-provided insurances. The difficulty is that you do have to be a faster-paced dentist because the reimbursements tend to be lower, but if that's the type of dentistry that you're wanting, I very highly suggest that you receive some kind of training and continue to pursue it because it is a very lucrative model if you know how to run it correctly. And this gets me to the type of dentistry that you want to provide. The insurance and the type of dentistry are very tightly connected, as well as all of these things. So the best way to talk about this is to kind of give an example. If I want to be a pediatric dentist, I should not be looking in retirement communities to set up my practice. Why? Well, the obvious answer is there are no kids in a retirement community. There's nobody that I can work my type of dentistry on, right? You need to make sure the services that you're providing are needs in the population that you're looking at. And so the factors that we tend to look at are median house income, the median age, the population density, the average household size, the ownership percentage in that population, the dentist to population ratio. All of these numbers that we will explore in different videos, they help to define a certain population that you want to look for. There's no one number that's perfect. What you are looking for is this balance of numbers that matches the type of dentistry that you want to provide. Take household percentage or home ownership percentages, right? If you are looking to provide public services, you don't actually want a high ownership percentage, because that means that those people aren't going to be taking public insurance. So you need to know the trends, and you need to know that there's nothing that's idealized about these. They just need to match the type of dentistry that you're trying to provide. Another thing that needs to match is the practice that you're looking at should match the practice that you want to have. You don't want to buy into a practice that has a patient population that does not fit the services you will provide. Imagine that all you do is wisdom tooth extractions. That's all that you do. Are you going to buy a pediatric dentist's office? No, you would never think of doing that. Why? Because those kids don't have wisdom teeth to pull just yet. And so it's really, really important that you buy into a practice that has the equipment that you need and has the services that you provide, so that when you get in there, you start providing the exact same services, and you kind of step in with minimal transference or minimal attrition when you get in there. One thing that's very important to assess is the codes and procedures that dentist provides. If you look at what they refer out versus what they provide, you can assess, well, am I going to be referring more or less than this dentist is? Am I going to be about on par with what this dentist refers? And you want to make sure that you have the ability to grow in the future. The last thing that we're going to look at today is location. Location is important because it directly connects to all of the things that we just barely talked about. First and foremost, you want to know where you want to live. Now, you might be content with living anywhere in the country that can provide you the kind of lifestyle that you're looking for from dentistry. And that's fine, but you need to make sure that you kind of define, are you going to live in a city? Are you going to live in a small town? Are you going to commute for a really long period of time? These things are very, very, very important. And it can be one of the most cost inefficiencies that you see is when somebody doesn't clearly define the location that they want to live in. So they start looking and spending money on all of these practices that they're looking at potentially buying, and it's a really expensive process. And it turns out they actually just didn't want to live in the place where they found a practice, right? And so all of that money was wasted because they don't end up moving to the place where they found a practice because they don't want to live there, right? So you really need to clearly define where you're going to live, what kind of commute you have, how long are you willing to be there for, do you want to be a part of the community that you're serving, or do you want to live outside of it? What's the cost of living? Does that meet your original desires of your living expenses and your goals? And then you want to absolutely make sure that the demographics of that location that you're looking at matches the type of demographics that you need for the practice that you're going to build and provide. So all of these 6 factors play a part in defining exactly what kind of practice we're going to have in the future, and it helps us to further define what is the future of ownership for us. If you can narrow down all 6 of these factors, then you will be miles ahead of the competition. And I guarantee you'll have a more clear vision and more clear goal of what you will end up being 5 and 10 years down in the road, and you will see success come to you quicker than those who do not define these things in their quote-unquote ideal practice. That's it for today. Thank you so much for coming and listening to our video. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe this video. Please suggest it to your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.